The Mystery of Pompeii's Final Moments, a forensic examination of Mount Vesuvius, eruption in 79 AD. The year 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted in one of the most devastating natural disasters in history, burying the Roman town of Pompeii under a thick layer of volcanic ash and pumice. For centuries, it was believed that the town's inhabitants had perished in the eruption, most notably from a torrential downpour of rocks, ash, and debris. However, recent forensic research is shedding light on a different, much more complex explanation for the town's destruction. While more than 1,000 bodies had been found in the partially excavated streets and homes of Pompeii, the mystery lies in the remarkable condition of these remains, contrary to the popular belief that the victims were killed by collapsing buildings or lava flows. Many of the bodies show no signs of trauma or violence. The assumption that the victims succumbed to lava, which would have taken at least a week to reach the city, seems to be entirely inaccurate. In fact, the bodies of Pompeii's victims appear almost perfectly preserved. Despite the town being decimated, this forensic puzzle has prompted a re-evaluation of the eruption's effects. In the past few years, the application of modern forensic science has led to new insights that completely overturn the traditional theories about Pompeii's destruction. For the first time, experts can now construct a detailed, hour-by-hour timeline of the eruption, shedding light on the real cause of death for the inhabitants and answering the age-old riddle of Pompeii's tragic end. Mount Vesuvius remains an active volcano, still erupting in short intervals. Over the past 2,000 years, the mountain has erupted more than 30 times, with some eruptions causing destruction in nearby towns. The most recent eruption in 1944 left visible scars in the surrounding areas. The new cone of Vesuvius, which formed after the eruption of 79 AD, is visible behind me. This cone continues to erupt as recently as 1944, when lava flowed from the crater, entering the nearby town of San Sebastiano, devastating homes and causing significant damage. Despite the widespread damage, only around 20 people lost their lives. Interestingly, it is incredibly rare for people to be killed by lava flows. The sheer velocity of the lava is slow enough to allow people ample time to evacuate the affected areas. Although lava flows destroy homes and fields, the death toll from eruptions is typically very low. Yet, when it comes to the 79 AD eruption, the situation was drastically different. The number of casualties was much higher than expected, which has intrigued researchers for centuries. The first clues into the true cause of death in Pompeii were not uncovered until 1594. That year, the architect Domenico Fontana was overseeing a tunnel project near Pompeii to divert water to a nearby munitions factory. His workers accidentally stumbled upon painted walls bearing the name Pompeii, but it wasn't until 1748 that serious excavations began. As archaeologists dug deeper, they uncovered treasures and artifacts hidden beneath the volcanic material that had buried the city. The material that encased Pompeii was not the typical hardened lava, but rather volcanic ash, dust, and pumice, which had fragmented upon impact, forming a fine, dust-like material. In 1863, archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli made a remarkable discovery. He noticed that many of the skeletons in Pompeii were found within hollow cavities in the volcanic material. Fiorelli had the brilliant idea to pour plaster into these cavities, and the resulting molds provided a chilling yet extraordinary look into the past. The ash had preserved not only the bones, but the exact shape of the victims' bodies, leaving behind a haunting impression of the people who once lived in Pompeii. These plaster molds, which have become some of the most iconic images associated with Pompeii, reveal startling details about the final moments of the town's residents. The victims appear to have been frozen in time, captured in their last moments of life. Some of them are in positions suggesting they were trying to escape, while others seem to have been caught in a state of rest, seemingly unaware of the impending disaster. This forensic breakthrough has led to new revelations about the eruption's actual cause. It's now clear that the deadly effects of the eruption were not due to lava, but rather the pyroclastic surge, an intense cloud of hot gas, ash, and debris that moved at an incredibly fast speed, engulfing the city. The victims were likely killed by the extreme heat and toxic gases from this surge, which reached temperatures of up to 10 degrees Celsius, 1832 degrees Fahrenheit, causing instantaneous death. This new understanding of the eruption of Vesuvius offers a more complete and accurate picture of the day Pompeii met its tragic end. The ancient city, once a thriving hub of Roman life, now stands as a testament to the power of nature and the resilience of archaeology. Its preservation under layers of volcanic material has allowed modern science to unravel the mysteries of its destruction, providing a glimpse into one of the most dramatic moments in ancient history. Pompeii, once lost to time, now serves as a window into the past, offering a wealth of information about Roman civilization, daily life, and the incredible forces of nature that can erase even the most prosperous cities from existence. The mysteries of Pompeii continue to captivate researchers, tourists, and historians alike. ensuring that this ancient city will never be forgotten. Asterisk, uncovering Pompeii. The role of forensic science in understanding ancient disasters. As more research is conducted, forensic science has become the key tool in unraveling the hidden truths of Pompeii's destruction. The volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD was unlike any other eruption before it. Modern scientists are now using the latest technology, including high-resolution imaging, 3D scanning, and chemical analysis, to study the remains of the victims and the city itself. These advancements allow for a clearer understanding of the eruption's impact on the inhabitants of Pompeii and have revealed new layers of evidence that were previously overlooked. One of the most interesting aspects of Pompeii's forensic analysis is the study of the remains of the victims themselves. Forensic pathologists, using the latest techniques, are able to determine not only how the victims died, but also their physical health before the eruption. By examining the bones, teeth, and other remains, scientists can deduce factors such as age, sex, nutrition, and even the effects of diseases that may have been prevalent at the time. These findings help paint a more complete picture of life in Pompeii, offering new insights into the lives of its inhabitants. Pompeii's architecture, a glimpse into Roman engineering genius. Pompeii's remarkably preserved architecture has been a source of fascination for historians and architects alike. From grand villas with intricate mosaic floors to public spaces like the amphitheater and the forum, Pompeii was a city built on Roman ingenuity. The city's design, with its paved streets, elaborate bathhouses, and well-planned homes, reflects the advanced engineering and urban planning skills of the Romans. The grand architecture of Pompeii reveals much about the Roman lifestyle. Many homes, particularly those belonging to the wealthier citizens, featured courtyards, gardens, and decorative wall paintings. These homes were not just functional living spaces but were also symbols of social status. The wealthiest residents would have enjoyed elaborate frescoes and mosaics depicting everything from mythological scenes to daily life. Some of the most famous murals found in Pompeii, such as those in the Villa of the Mysteries, showcase the sophistication of Roman art. With their vivid colors and attention to detail, Pompeii's public spaces also reflect Roman design principles. The amphitheater, for example, is an architectural marvel, designed to accommodate thousands of spectators for gladiatorial games and other public spectacles. The building itself is a testament to Roman engineering, with its advanced acoustics, structural integrity, and capacity to hold large crowds. Similarly, the public baths were not only places for bathing, but also social hubs, where Romans gathered to relax, exercise, and engage in political and philosophical discussions. Asterisk, the environmental impact of Mount Vesuvius, an eruption like no other. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD is often considered one of the most catastrophic volcanic events in recorded history. What makes this eruption so unique, however, is the combination of the pyroclastic surge, ashfall, and the unexpected speed of the eruption. Unlike most eruptions that occur over a prolonged period of time, the eruption of Vesuvius occurred in a matter of hours, leaving little time for evacuation. Scientists now believe that the eruption was a result of a combination of factors. The magma chamber beneath the volcano had been slowly filling over many years, creating pressure that eventually led to an explosive release. The eruption began with an explosive release of gas, ash, and pumice that rose high into the sky. As the eruption intensified, pyroclastic flows began to surge down the slopes of the volcano, covering the city of Pompeii in a blanket of ash, rock, and toxic gases. This volcanic event is unique because the volcanic ash that buried Pompeii was not the thick, solid rock associated with typical lava flows. Instead, the eruption created a dense cloud of ash and pumice that filled the air, making it difficult for the inhabitants of Pompeii to escape. As a result, many of the city's residents were caught in the intense heat and suffocating gases, dying almost instantly from thermal shock or asphyxiation. Pompeii's preservation, a time capsule of Roman civilization. The preservation of Pompeii is often referred to as a time capsule, offering a rare glimpse into the daily life of a Roman city at the height of the empire. Unlike other ancient cities, Pompeii was not simply destroyed but was preserved by a thick layer of volcanic material. This unique preservation allows modern archaeologists to study the city in great detail, examining everything from the layout of the streets to the objects that people used in their everyday lives. The volcanic ash that buried Pompeii served as a protective layer, preventing the decay of organic materials such as wood, cloth, and food. This preservation has allowed archaeologists to uncover a vast array of artifacts, including tools, pottery, coins, and even food that was left behind by the residents. One of the most remarkable discoveries was the preservation of carbonized loaves of bread, which are still on display in the archaeological sites today. Moreover, the preservation of Pompeii's buildings and frescoes has provided invaluable insight into Roman architecture and art. The city's grand villas, public baths, and temples were adorned with intricate paintings and mosaics that have survived for nearly 2,000 years. These artworks depict scenes of Roman gods and goddesses, mythological creatures, and everyday life, offering a visual representation of Roman culture and beliefs. Pompeii and the broader impact on Roman archaeology. The excavation of Pompeii has had a profound impact on the field of Roman archaeology. As one of the most well-preserved ancient cities, Pompeii has provided scholars with an unprecedented opportunity to study Roman life. The city's remains offer a wealth of information on everything from Roman architecture to social structure, religion, and even the diets of the inhabitants. Pompeii has also played a key role in the development of modern archaeological methods. The excavations in Pompeii were some of the first systematic archaeological digs, setting the standard for how archaeological sites should be excavated and studied. The discovery of Pompeii has inspired numerous excavations in other parts of the Roman Empire, leading to a greater understanding of the Roman world. In addition to its academic significance, Pompeii has become a cultural icon. The city has been the subject of countless books, films, and documentaries, and its legacy continues to inspire artists, writers, and filmmakers. The tragic story of Pompeii's destruction, coupled with its remarkable preservation, ensures that it will remain one of the most studied and visited archaeological sites in the world. Conclusion: the enduring mystery and legacy of Pompeii. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD remains one of the most dramatic and studied events in history. Through the efforts of modern forensic scientists, archaeologists, and historians, we are gradually uncovering the secrets of Pompeii's destruction. From the forensic examination of the victims to the exploration of the city's architecture and daily life, Pompeii continues to captivate the world. Today, Pompeii stands not only as a historical site, but also as a symbol of the power of nature and the resilience of human civilization. The city's preservation provides us with a rare opportunity to connect with the past and learn from the lives of those who lived in ancient Rome. As we continue to explore and understand Pompeii, its legacy will undoubtedly inspire future generations to appreciate the complexity and fragility of human history. The enigma of Pompeii's victims, how new technology and forensic science are solving the mystery of death in 79 AD. Centuries, scientists and archaeologists have been baffled by the discovery of over 1,000 bodies exhumed from the ruins of Pompeii. Many of the bodies were found in remarkably preserved states, but few showed signs of the horrific injuries expected from such a catastrophic volcanic eruption. Instead, the bodies were often virtually intact, with little sign of trauma or crushing injuries. The mystery of how these victims died has puzzled researchers for years. It's only in recent years, thanks to the development of advanced technology like 3D MRI scanning, that clues to the true cause of death have begun to emerge. At the University of Naples, Professor Francesco Sasso has led pioneering research by scanning 5 skeletons uncovered just outside Pompeii during a recent road widening project. One of the key discoveries came from scanning a skull that showed an unusual anomaly. Upon close inspection, Professor Sasso and his team found a large plug of white, powdery material lodged in the left maxillary sinus tubes of the skull. What made this discovery even more intriguing was the realization that the powdery material closely resembled dust particles. It was quickly apparent that these individuals had been exposed to extremely dusty air during the eruption. But could this exposure to dust account for the high death toll in Pompeii? Forensic scientist Geraldo Sigurdsson has been researching the eruption of Mount Vesuvius for over 2 decades in search of an answer. Sigurdsson has spent years studying the rock strata around Mount Vesuvius and has recently completed an exhaustive analysis of the materials deposited in the region during the eruption. Standing at a site known as Heto Plant, located just southwest of the volcano, Sigurdsson highlights the importance of the area for his research. This site, which was once an imperial villa, offers a complete stratigraphy of the layers of volcanic material that fell from the sky during the eruption. Sigurdsson has been able to establish a timeline of how the eruption unfolded, and has measured the amount of material that was deposited in the area. His findings suggest that the material fell like rain, creating a thick blanket of ash and pumice that covered Pompeii and its residents. Sigurdsson's work has led to an intriguing hypothesis. Could the victims of Pompeii have been buried alive by a torrent of volcanic ash and dust? To test this theory, Sigurdsson turned to the only eyewitness account of the eruption, the writings of Pliny the Younger, a Roman official who was present at the eruption with his uncle, Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Younger's account of the eruption, written in a letter to the historian, provides valuable clues that have helped solve the mystery of Pompeii's destruction. Pliny the Younger's account focuses on the heroic death of his uncle, but it also provides crucial details about the eruption's timeline. According to Pliny, the eruption began at noon on August 24th, with a column of smoke rising to great heights. He described the cloud as having a trunk that split off into branches, likening it to the shape of an umbrella pine tree. The eruption was preceded by a loud explosion, which caused a massive release of gas and ash into the atmosphere. This description has perplexed scientists for centuries. Could the eruption really have been this massive? Sigurdsson has now used modern technology to measure the total amount of material that was deposited by the eruption and has concluded that Pliny's account was entirely accurate. The eruption of 79 AD was not a slow-moving lava flow, as once believed, but rather a massive explosive event that only happens once every 2,000 to 5,000 years. Sigurdsson's research has shown that Vesuvius erupted with unprecedented force, sending a cloud of gas, ash, and pumice high into the sky, where it remained suspended for hours. The eruption was a result of complex geological processes beneath the volcano. Sigurdsson explains that Vesuvius has many different eruption styles, ranging from lava flows to highly explosive eruptions. Underneath the volcano lies a massive magma chamber, a large underground reservoir of molten rock. This chamber, which is about 5 kilometers in diameter and 3 kilometers deep, is responsible for the tremors and earthquakes that occur when it fills with magma. As the magma chamber fills, it causes the ground above to heat up, eventually leading to the splitting of the rock and the release of volcanic gases. When the magma is unable to escape slowly, it builds up pressure until it erupts explosively. As seen in 79 AD, Sigurdsson's analysis of the eruption confirms that the catastrophic event that took place on that fateful day was not a typical lava flow. Instead, it was a massive eruption of molten rock and gases, propelled by the immense pressure that had built up inside the magma chamber. The force of the eruption caused pyroclastic flows, which are fast-moving clouds of hot gas and ash that surged down the slopes of the volcano. These pyroclastic flows were responsible for the majority of the destruction and death in Pompeii, and they reached the city with incredible speed, leaving the residents little time to escape. The fatal exposure to pyroclastic surges. Key to understanding the mass deaths in Pompeii lies in the lethal nature of pyroclastic surges. Unlike lava, which moves slowly and allows people to evacuate, pyroclastic surges are fast-moving and deadly. Composed of hot gases, ash, and volcanic rocks, these flows can reach temperatures of up to 10 degrees Celsius, 1832 degrees Fahrenheit, causing instant death upon exposure. The toxic gases in the pyroclastic surge also asphyxiated the inhabitants, making it impossible for them to flee or survive. As the pyroclastic flows descended upon Pompeii, they trapped the residents in their homes and streets. Many of the bodies found in Pompeii bear the marks of this sudden and extreme exposure. The intense heat caused their bodies to rapidly dehydrate, while the ash and gases suffocated them, preserving their bodies in the same state in which they died. The plaster casts created by archaeologists in the 19th century have provided a haunting glimpse into these final moments, capturing the victims in poses that suggest panic and struggle. The discovery of these plaster casts, along with the forensic analysis of the victims, has reshaped our understanding of Pompeii's tragic fate. Forensic experts now believe that the deaths of the Pompeians were caused not by lava flows, but by the deadly pyroclastic surges that swept through the city in a matter of minutes. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD remains one of the most devastating volcanic events in history. But it also serves as a powerful reminder of the destructive power of nature, unveiling the tragedy, how the pyroclastic surge of Vesuvius brought death to Pompeii for centuries. Historians and scientists were stumped by the mysterious preservation of Pompeii's victims, while over 1,000 bodies were uncovered in the ruins. Many exhibited no signs of the violence one would expect from a catastrophic volcanic eruption. Instead of being crushed by falling debris or burned by molten lava, most bodies seem to have perished without physical injury, leaving researchers puzzled. It wasn't until modern technology came into play, specifically 3D MRI scanning, that strong clues began to emerge about the cause of death. Professor Francesco Sasso from the University of Naples was one of the leading experts who took part in scanning the skeletons of victims found just outside Pompeii during a recent road widening project. Through these scans, an intriguing discovery was made. One of the skulls showed an anomaly in the left maxillary sinus tubes. A large plug of white, powdery material was lodged in the tubes, which, upon closer inspection, appeared to be composed of tiny white particles resembling dust. It soon became clear that the residents of Pompeii had been exposed to an enormous amount of volcanic ash. This raised a question: could such exposure be responsible for the deaths of so many? And if so, how exactly did this dusty air lead to the demise of Pompeii's people? Forensic scientist Sigurdsson, who has dedicated over 20 years to studying the eruptions of Vesuvius, embarked on a mission to answer this very question. Sigurdsson, along with his team, spent years examining rock strata at multiple sites around Vesuvius, piecing together the eruption's timeline, intensity, and devastating effects. Standing at the Hatto plant, Site 10 Imperial Villa southwest of the volcano, Sigurdsson explained the significance of this location in his research. The site had provided a complete stratigraphy revealing the multiple layers of volcanic material that fell during the eruption. Sigurdsson's studies confirmed that the material fell like rain, covering the entire city of Pompeii in a dense blanket of volcanic ash, dust, and pumice. Through these findings, Sigurdsson was able to propose an explanation for the high number of casualties. Could it be that the people of Pompeii were buried alive? To further understand this, Sigurdsson turned to the only eyewitness account of the eruption, Pliny the Younger, whose detailed letter to the historian Tacitus provided crucial clues about the eruption's start and its magnitude. Pliny the Younger's eyewitness account, the eruption of 79 AD, in his letter. Pliny the Younger recounts the eruption of Vesuvius as he, his mother, and his uncle Pliny the Elder watched from their location 30 kilometers away in the port of Mysia. Pliny the Younger provides vital information regarding the eruption's scale and timing. According to his account, the eruption began around noon on August 24th, when an unusual cloud formed above Vesuvius. He described the cloud as resembling an umbrella pine, with a trunk that split off into multiple branches. This description has long perplexed scientists, who struggled to understand how the eruption could have been so massive. Sigurdsson, however, has conducted research using modern measurement techniques to assess the amount of volcanic material deposited by the eruption. His calculations show that Pliny was absolutely correct. Vesuvius's eruption was unlike any typical lava flow. Instead, it was a massive, explosive event that only occurs once every 2,000 to 5,000 years. The eruption was far more violent than previously thought. Sigurdsson's research reveals that the eruption of 79 AD was not a slow-moving lava flow, as had long been believed. Instead, it was an explosive release of molten rock and gas, which sent a towering cloud of volcanic ash, pumice, and gases high into the sky. The eruption unleashed a force so powerful that it destroyed everything in its path, including the city of Pompeii. The science behind the explosive eruption of Vesuvius. Mount Vesuvius, unlike other volcanoes, produces highly explosive eruptions. Under the surface of the volcano lies a massive magma chamber, a reservoir of molten rock that fuels the eruptions. This chamber, which is approximately 5 kilometers in diameter and 3 kilometers deep, gradually fills with magma over time. As the chamber fills, the pressure increases, leading to earthquakes and the heating of the groundwater. When the pressure becomes too great, the rock above the magma chamber splits, allowing the magma to escape through a thin column. If this magma escapes slowly, it results in a lava flow. However, when the pressure is too high, the magma erupts explosively, as it did in 79 AD. This explosive eruption sent pyroclastic surges of fast-moving cloud of hot gases, ash, and volcanic rock racing down the slopes of the volcano at unimaginable speeds, instantly incinerating everything in its path. The real cause of death, pyroclastic surges and heat exposures. Most significant discovery regarding Pompeii's destruction is that the victims likely did not die from lava but from pyroclastic surges. These surges, which are clouds of gas and ash moving at speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour, were the true killers. The heat and toxic gases in the surges were so intense that they caused instant death by thermal shock and asphyxiation. Forensic analysis of the victims' remains supports this theory. Many bodies found in Pompeii show signs of heat exposure, and the preservation of their bodies in plastic casts indicates that the victims were quickly covered in ash and debris. This sudden burial, coupled with the heat and gases, made escape impossible. A timeline of Pompeii's final hours, thanks to the work of scientists like Sigurdsson and a clearer picture of the eruption's timeline has emerged. The eruption likely began around noon, as described by Pliny the Younger, with a massive explosion that sent ash and pumice high into the air. Within hours, pyroclastic surges reached the city, killing many of its inhabitants instantly. The ash cloud continued to rise, and over the course of several hours, Pompeii was buried under several meters of volcanic material. By evening, the eruption subsided, leaving behind a desolate landscape. Pompeii's buildings, streets, and homes were preserved beneath layers of ash and pumice, creating a time capsule that has provided unparalleled insight into Roman life. The bodies of the victims, preserved by the volcanic material, remained in their final resting positions, frozen in time for centuries. The preservation of Pompeii, a snapshot of Roman civilizations. The tragic eruption of Vesuvius left behind more than just ruins. It left a city perfectly preserved by nature's wrath. Archaeologists continue to study the remains of Pompeii to this day, unearthing new insights into Roman culture, daily life, and the people who lived there. The city stands as a testament to the destructive power of nature and the resilience of the human spirit. Through the continued efforts of modern science and archaeology, the mystery of Pompeii's final hours is being solved. The victims of Pompeii may have been buried alive by the volcanic ash and suffocating gases, but their tragic story serves as a reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of life. The science behind Vesuvius, Explosive eruption in Pompeii's fatal hesitation. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD continues to captivate researchers and historians alike. But understanding why the death toll was so high in Pompeii remains a challenging puzzle. Most of the victims of the eruption were not killed by lava flows, as commonly believed, but rather by the pyroclastic surges and dense ash that filled the air. Forensic scientists have long puzzled over why these victims didn't escape, given that the materials ejected from the volcano were not initially life-threatening. Professor Sigurdsson's findings provide some answers. As the eruption began, dense, fragmented rocks and pumice shot up into the sky at an extraordinary rate. However, the lightweight nature of the pumice material was not enough to cause immediate harm. It fell slowly at a rate of about 20 centimeters per hour, giving Pompeii's residents the time to react. In fact, some historical accounts, such as that of Pliny the Younger, suggest that the people of Pompeii were able to protect themselves by covering their heads with pillows, tying them down with cloth to guard against the falling debris.
It appears that for many, the initial reaction was one of confusion rather than panic. Pompeii had not witnessed a major eruption in over 400 years, and the people living there did not consider Vesuvius to be an active threat. The eruption's ash fall was not as destructive as previously believed. As the pumice began to fall in what appeared to be a harmless manner, many Pompeians chose to remain in their homes, waiting for the situation to stabilize. Pompeii's earthquake, history and its influence on the eruption response. The inhabitants of Pompeii were no strangers to tremors, and this familiarity with earthquake activity may have contributed to their hesitation. In 62 AD, a massive earthquake had rocked the region, nearly destroying the town. The residents had rebuilt, and despite this seismic activity, they continued to live their daily lives with an underlying sense of normalcy. Earthquakes, it seemed, were just a part of life in this region. It wasn't until weeks later that more serious tremors were felt, signaling the impending eruption. Evidence from the site suggests that many homes had already sustained damage from the earthquake of 62 AD. The Villa Castellamonte, for example, was one of many buildings that had recently been patched up, with cracks in the walls and frescoes indicating repairs from the previous tremor. Historians, including Ray Lawrence, have pointed out that the residents likely did not perceive the eruption as an immediate threat because of their prior experiences with earthquakes. The shaking of the ground might have been mistaken for another earthquake rather than the prelude to a violent volcanic eruption. This tendency to stay put and wait out the tremors was common, as it had been with past seismic activity. Even Pliny the Younger, who witnessed the eruption firsthand, remained inside reading history texts while the deadly eruption continued. The fatal decision to hesitate, how the delay cost lives despite the warning signs. Many Pompeians did not immediately flee the city. New mapping studies and excavation data from Professor de Carollas show that there was significant hesitation among the population. Bodies were found in various stages of movement, some attempting to leave their homes while others were still in their homes, seemingly waiting for the worst to pass. One key detail that has emerged is the presence of iron house keys found with many of the victims. These keys were likely carried by individuals who locked their homes before attempting to escape. The decision to secure personal belongings, including their homes, is telling. It suggests that rather than prioritizing their own survival, many Pompeians initially focused on securing their possessions, which delayed their departure and ultimately contributed to their demise. In addition to this, Sigurdsson's calculations indicate that the eruption's intensity increased as the day went on. Initially, the eruption was relatively slow, with magma ejected at a rate of 1 million kilograms per second. However, this rate steadily increased as the eruption progressed, with the rate of magma discharge reaching 10 million kilograms per second at its peak. This dramatic acceleration in activity likely caused the massive pyroclastic surges that killed many of Pompeii's residents. As the eruption reached its most dangerous phase, the Plinian stage of the eruption, the final act of destruction, the most violent phase of the eruption, known as the Plinian stage, is named after Pliny the Younger, who was the first to document such explosive volcanic activity. During this stage, Vesuvius released vast amounts of gas and ash, which shot into the sky and then fell back to Earth as pyroclastic material. These surges of hot gases and rock reached incredible speeds, traveling down the slopes of the volcano and engulfing Pompeii within minutes. This phase of the eruption is the key to understanding how the majority of Pompeii's inhabitants died. Rather than being struck by falling rocks or buried by lava, the victims were likely overwhelmed by the heat and toxic gases of the pyroclastic surges. This explanation fits with the forensic evidence, as many of the victims were found with no external injuries but showed signs of heat exposure. The rapid burial of Pompeii under a thick layer of volcanic ash preserved the city and its inhabitants, allowing modern scientists to reconstruct the events of that fateful day. The final hours of Pompeii, a testimony to the fury of Vesuvius as scientists continue to piece together the events of August 24th, 79 AD. The story of Pompeii's destruction remains a testament to both the power of nature and the resilience of human civilization. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius, while catastrophic, also offers unparalleled insight into the Roman world, providing a snapshot of daily life frozen in time. Thanks to modern forensic science, we now know that the residents of Pompeii were not victims of slow-moving lava, but of an explosive and instantaneous volcanic event. The hesitation of the population, compounded by their unfamiliarity with such an explosive eruption, cost them their lives. However, the preservation of Pompeii's ruins and the plaster casts of its victims continue to offer valuable lessons in both geology and human behavior. Today, Pompeii remains one of the most important archaeological sites in the world, a haunting reminder of the destructive forces that shaped the ancient world and continue to shape our understanding of history. An eruption column that went up to great height in the atmosphere. Actually, we've done some modeling and investigations on this particular deposit and the phase of the eruption, and we know that it started off as about a 17 kilometers high eruption column, and we went up to about 32 kilometers. In fact, the heat generated by the eruption was so great that the pumice carried 30 kilometers above the Earth's surface, 3 times higher than airliners fly with, Pliny providing the start time of new Blitzen's flow. Rate data show that by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Pompeii was smothered in a blanket of pumice nearly a meter deep by this stage. The roofs all over the town were under unbearable pressure. Between then and the end of the day, almost all of the 20,000 people archaeologists estimate lived in the city did finally live, but 1044 bodies have been recovered within the city walls. Why did they, and perhaps even more new findings, suggests that not everyone may have been able to flee professors? Caparo Low and Casino have been able to extract DNA from 13 skeletons found at a house in the town's main shopping street. The cars are polybio. The results show that there were strong bonds of attachment lovers' family in the people from Polybius. House, there were 2 people with the disease spina bifida, although we can't say if it would have affected him in any way, but there are telltale signs for why they may have stayed one of these. People was a young pregnant woman at the end of her term, very close to giving birth, and this perhaps could be the reason. They decided not to flee, to stay in the house, and to hope to save themselves. Maybe she lives in Gaza. The spirit is a lasting one, decides to stay because one lover is sick and they can't flee because they want to remain together. That seems reasonable to me. They avoid, say, vision. These pictures show some of them in the position they were found, 2 of them in particular. These 2 are holding hands. This, of course, suggests a very strong family bond. We think that one of the 2 is a teenager, so he's probably holding his father's hand in addition to DNA. Testing Professor Sasso has found that in the group he has analyzed there was someone who may have been in too. Much pain to flee. Well, this subject suffered from toothache, a serious toothache in the roots, and he also suffered from an abscess of the maxillary sinus. It's one of those toothaches where half the face is swollen up and in great pain. That's one reason he may have stayed. If there were other reasons, we don't know. But he must have been somebody with a strong resistance to pain. He probably was a soldier or a gladiator. This perfectly healed wound, it's obviously a sword wound, shows he was a fighter, a tough man. Whether they were forced to stay or whether they fled, the population of Pompeii must have feared the worst. Bizarre. Weather could only have added to the sense of doom. Follow. The elements are working against you there. Continuous lightning strikes because one of the properties of a big explosive eruption like this is that it basically short-circuits the electrical conditions between the Earth and the upper atmosphere, and that produces almost continuous lightning in the eruption cloud. So that would have been a frightful scene. Pliny, the elder's predicament, illustrates the growing chaos. He tried to lead the Roman navy to the coast near Pompeii to evacuate refugees, but they were beaten back by huge flows of floating pumice. He eventually landed at Stabii and took refuge with his friend Pomponianus. But soon the rescuer became a hostage, finding the door of his room locked by the palace wall. They debated whether to stay indoors or take that chance in the open, for the buildings were now shaking with violent shocks and seemed to be swaying to and fro as if they were torn from their foundations. Outside, on the other hand, there was the danger of falling pumice stones, even though these were light and porous. However, after comparing the risks,
they chose the latter from Pliny the Younger account. It seems that his uncle Pliny the Elder made it to the relative safety of Stabii be touched by the late evening. But by that stage, around 9 p.m. the eruption was at its most powerful. In Pompeii the pumice was getting very deep. Let's look at the pumice that has accumulated here to a height of or a thickness of almost 2.5 meters. Of course, we begin here around noon on the 24th on the ground, on the Roman ground that I'm standing on, and here it was covered with pig amphoras, and then during the early stages of the eruption we have an accumulation of the white pumice ball falling out of the sky and accumulating here gradually during the afternoon of the 24th and around our late afternoon or evening to begin to see a change in the color of the humus ball turning darker gray, and that continues to fall up to about 3 or 4 in the morning on the next day when the first surge reaches Pompeii, and that is that dark band what we see on the top of this excavation with no lava flows and only a few large rocks in the deposit. Scientists have naturally assumed that this never-ending cascade of pumice is what eventually overcame the victims, but Astonishingly, circuits and findings show this is not the case. We see the tremendous effects of that sorts on the people, and we see where the people were in Pompeii. They weren't down here at ground level, they weren't walking around, they weren't being buried by the pumice fall, but rather they were walking on top of it. And we see the remains right here on top. Amazingly, Sigerson's theory is that just about everyone survived the constant pumice fall by continuing to walk on top of them. Ever-growing carpet of rock. Their cause of death was about to arrive when the eruption finally subsided. Pompeii was buried in 4 meters of pumice. Centuries later, as the excavations commenced, a pattern started to emerge. A few bodies were found deep down, indicating they died early on. They appeared to have been hit by falling masonry, but the vast majority were found much higher up near the surface, indicating they died later. In fact, they were all found at exactly the same level, strongly suggesting they died at virtually the same time, and none of them had any apparent injuries. I think they died for lack of oxygen by suffocation. That's a fissure by suffocation. One of them had his mouth open. It was shocking because if you look at the excavation pictures when the skeleton was found, his mouth was wide open for lack of oxygen. Family value. Same thing with the horses. Their head was turned. They were on the floor, but their mouth was turned up, so they clearly lacked oxygen. The position of the bodies is powerful evidence. It strongly suggests that the victims died by inhaling something lethal. But what some of the mouths of the victims of Pompeii seems to confirm this hypothesis. Some of them are lifted up on their arms, as if craning their necks upwards towards some slightly cleaner air. We're still waiting to prove this, but they must have had some serious breathing difficulties. So what could have made the air suddenly so deadly? If breathing dust had been the cause, surely they would all have died at different times because of different lung capacities and hiding places. It is only now, after 20 years of painstaking analysis, that Sigurdsson can prove what really happened. Vesuvius generated what is now known as a pyroclastic surge. I was very lucky to be involved in the research on a very similar eruption that took place in 1982. And I was the eruption of Erupted volcano in Mexico that killed about 2,000 people. And in that eruption, several surges were produced that were witnessed, and people were killed in those. And I was on the scene there about 2 days after the eruption, and was able to study those surges. And they look exactly like these surges. Sigurdsson's identification of surge layers in the rock at Pompeii was the answer scientists had been waiting for. Not every volcano develops a surge. It's a complex phenomenon where the eruption can be seen like a jet engine. The power it's generating is keeping the whole column up in the air. But as the crater around the eruption starts to cave in, it interrupts the flow of power. The column briefly collapses. The result is a falling cloud that hits the ground at over 200 kilometers an hour. It spreads out over a vast area, like a giant dust-filled hurricane, knocking over walls, destroying everything in its path. The mystery of the surge is that as it settles, it leaves nothing but a very thin layer of ash, which is quickly buried by further palace wall. Over here we go to the wall of the deposit where we can see the other surges quite clearly. We have the full deposit, the Pompeii fault deposit here, quite large promises, because we're fairly close to the volcano, and the first surge forming this thin layer followed by another stage of fallout. So the first surge represents the first collapse of the eruption column. Instead of a very high plenty on eruption column, it's produced this material. We now have a collapse, or a fountain of ash and pumice coming out of the volcano, flowing down the sides and creating a glowing avalanche of pumice and ash reaching this site. Then in a few minutes, Sigurdsson has calculated that Vesuvius took 20 hours to eject all of its material in the resulting 4-meter thick pumice layer. There are 6 surge layers. By measuring where they are, Sigurdsson is at last able to show exactly when they happened. The first was at 1 o'clock a.m. It spread west and pulverized the town of Herculaneum at 2:15 a.m. There was a second bigger surge at 6:30 a.m. 18.5 hours after the eruption had first started. An even larger third surge was generated. Luckily, it ran out of energy just reaching the northern walls of Pompeii. Nevertheless, it must have made the air thick with dust at 7:30 a.m. Still choking and wheezing, the inhabitants of Pompeii were overrun by surge number 4. They were slain by an ashen dust-filled wind that swept over them at more than 200 kilometers an hour. Not only that, it was also viciously hot. Sort of make our way gently on top of the weir into the pumice ball. We see that the surge is actually a very thin layer. Surge number 4, it's only about 5 to 10 centimeters in thickness. But this surge and the subsequent surge over here are the deposits that contain all of the human remains, or almost all of the human remains in Pompeii. In addition, they contain building material that was carried along in the insets, and that is now being preserved over here to my right. You see Several of the bodies of the people that were suffocated index fixated in the surge because of the very high heat and searing high temperatures, and being choked essentially on inhaling the hot ash and dusty air, so this is one of these excellent sites where we can see the relationship between the volcanic processes, the generation of the hot surge, and how it the fact that the people demonstrating to us clearly what was the lethal agent of the eruption here in Pompeii. There was the fourth surge. In fact, there is strong evidence that the pyroclastic surge was at least 100 degrees Celsius, enough to boil water. Lapping by recording the temperature around the victims must have reached rather high levels. Why do I think the temperature was that high? Because we didn't find any bacteria in the soil surrounding the victims, but we found bacteria in the natural cavities of the bone remains of the victims. This means that the temperature was hot enough to boil and sterilize the soil. The victims of Pompeii had a horrible death. A thick red-hot hurricane roared in their faces like a jet blast. It seared their skin and filled the insides of their mouths, noses, and lungs with scalding dust. That is why many look like they are sleeping. They fell to the ground, struggling in vain to shield themselves from the hellish burning wind. But as quickly as it came, the surge disappeared, leaving its victims to die of their burns, struggling to breathe. It's very humbling for me to see this. As a scientist, I can come distance myself from it to some extent, but then again, I am reminded by the number of colleagues that I've had and friends who died in surges like this in pyroclastic flows. It also reminds me of scenes I saw when I was working in Mexico in 1980, to 2 days after the eruption of Algae John, where 1,800 people were killed in surges of this sort, and I had the unpleasant experience of seeing the bodies interred from that event. So it's a horrible sight. Only a handful of volcanoes every century generate an eruption column. Few of those cause pyroclastic surge glands. Even fewer are ever captured on film. During the 1997 eruption of Montserrat, a small surge was created. Typically, it was fast, hot, and devastated everything in its path with little warning. It killed 20 people. This is what killed the people of Pompeii. It should have been the end, but Sigurdsson has found one massive final surge far deadlier than all the rest at 8 a.m. It swept down the mountain through Herculaneum, through Pompeii, and out into the countryside beyond. Many who had fled the town and thought they had escaped were caught up in Vesuvius' final deadly breath. In fact, the outer fringes reached the beach at Stabii, where Pliny's uncle was trapped again. His account exactly matches Sigurdsson's geological data. The flames and smell of sulfur, which gave warning of the approaching fire, drove the others to take flight and roused him to stand up. He stood and then suddenly collapsed, I imagine, because the dense fumes choked his breathing by blocking his windpipe, which was constitutionally weak and narrow, and often inflamed. When daylight returned on the 26th, 2 days after the last day he had seen, his body was found intact and uninjured, still fully clothed and looking more like sleep and death. News of his uncle's misfortune no doubt came from sailors and slaves who had been far enough away to survive the vestigial effects of the last surge. Pliny the Younger narrowly missed being overwhelmed by the massive cloud himself. It had traveled 30 kilometers across the Bay of Naples, looking like a black tidal wave, and hit the headland of Misenum just as it ran out of energy. People bewailed their own fate, all that of their relatives, and there were some who prayed for death in their terror of dying. Many sought the aid of the gods, but still more imagined there were no gods left, and that the universe was plunged into eternal darkness forevermore. The complete devastation inside Pompeii, but also the horrors found outside its walls, led to the suspicion that many more of the refugees must have died while fleeing on the roads and on the beaches. The area covered by the final surge cloud is so unusually vast that only 1% of it has been excavated. In fact, no matter where the archaeologists dig, they always find bodies. Looking for a stylist. To the south of Pompeii there was the river port, and another chance to escape could be to get to the river port, take a boat, and leave their excavations there. At the end of the 19th century, in the actual river now, that area, which we call Meridian Asia, is again under excavation by the superintendent of Pompeii, and more than 80 bodies have been recovered, which means that they probably had already fled Pompeii or the surrounding area and had taken shelter in that area. This discovery of bodies far outside Pompeii suggests a huge death toll. Sigurdsson's prediction is that although 1,000 have been found 10 times that died half the population, 10,000 people failed to escape the final pyroclastic surge. So the big question is, where are all the thousands of bodies? Are the Pompeians? My suspicion is that they're down south of the city south, outside the city walls, buried underneath the pyroclastic flows the searches in the region of the Sarno Valley, the region where the Sarno River flows now. It's a region that is now fairly densely inhabited. It's a region where there probably will not be a lot of archaeological excavation in the future because of dense population. But if we want to find out more about the fate of the Pompeians, I think that's where we should look, not in the city but outside. Pliny does not tell us if most Pompeians lived or died. Subsequent Roman writers make little mention of them. It is known that the Emperor Titus spent a fortune in redevelopment aid for the area, but the material that buried them and their bones tells us that they suffered one of the rarest and deadliest of all volcanic phenomena, a hot pyroclastic surge that choked and burnt them as a result of the collapse of one of the biggest eruption columns of all time, an eruption that few had a hope of surviving. The emotional landscape of Pompeii. Life in the shadow of Vesuvius. Pompeii, in the days leading up to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, was a thriving Roman city filled with the everyday hustle and bustle of urban life. The people of Pompeii, like most Roman citizens, were proud of their achievements and accustomed to a structured social lifestyle. They lived in a world where appearances mattered, and the city was filled with evidence of Roman wealth, power, and cultural richness. Yet, beneath the vibrant exterior, the inhabitants had their personal dreams, ambitions, anxieties, and fears, just like people in any society. Daily life. The calm before the storm for the majority of Pompeii's residents. The days before the eruption were no different from any other day. The bustling streets echoed with the voices of merchants hawking their goods, artisans toiling in their workshops, and families navigating through their routines. In the marketplaces, the rich aroma of fresh produce, fish, and spices filled the air, while the sound of chariots and horses clattered on the cobblestone roads. The city itself was divided into social classes, each with its own set of responsibilities and aspirations. The wealthy elite, living in opulent villas adorned with frescoes and mosaics, would have felt secure in their prosperity. They would have entertained guests in their lavish homes, discussing politics, philosophy, and the latest cultural developments. Meanwhile, the middle-class tradesmen, shopkeepers, and small landowners would have worked hard to make a living, striving to better their social standing. For the lower classes, including slaves and laborers, life was less predictable. They worked long hours under harsh conditions, fulfilling the demands of the wealthy elite. Yet, despite their hard lives, there was a sense of community and shared experiences. Even those at the bottom of the social ladder participated in the collective life of Pompeii, frequenting the public baths, attending gladiatorial games, and celebrating festivals that united the city. Though each group in Pompeii had different responsibilities, a common thread tied them all together: a desire for stability, personal progress, and connection. Relationships, whether familial, romantic, or platonic, were central to their emotional well-being. People would have laughed, argued, loved, and wept just as people do today. Family life and emotional bonds. Family in Pompeii was the cornerstone of emotional life. Many of the victims found in the city were buried in positions that suggest they were at home with their loved ones when disaster struck. In Roman society, the concept of familia extended beyond just the nuclear family. It included slaves and even close friends, creating a tight-knit unit. The emotional bonds in these families were deeply felt, with each member contributing to the household's success and security. For women, the family home was their domain. They were responsible for managing the household, caring for children, and making sure the day-to-day needs of the family were met. Women of higher social classes were often more educated and could engage in philosophical or political discussions, while those of the lower classes focused on managing the household and caring for their families. Mothers, daughters, and sisters shared an intimate connection, passing down family traditions and ensuring the continuation of family values. Fathers, on the other hand, were seen as the providers and protectors of the family. They worked in the public sphere, engaging in commerce, politics, or administration, but they also carried the responsibility of safeguarding their family's reputation and future. The emotional weight of providing for and protecting one's family was a constant source of both pride and anxiety. The family's emotional strength was tested in times of crisis, but in the peaceful days before the eruption, it was a source of security and support. Personal struggles and hidden fears. Despite the outward appearance of prosperity and contentment, the people of Pompeii also carried personal struggles and emotional burdens. For the middle and lower classes, there were constant pressures to make ends meet. Many of the tradesmen, shopkeepers, and farmers lived paycheck to paycheck, worried about the impact of an unexpected illness, crop failure, or bad harvest. While they might have enjoyed occasional luxuries, such as wine, fresh food, and entertainment, the specter of financial ruin loomed over many families. For slaves, life in Pompeii was even more precarious. Though they had basic shelter and food, their lives were largely defined by their status as property. Yet, slaves too had emotions and personal desires. Some were able to form deep emotional connections with their masters and fellow slaves, though their futures were uncertain and controlled by others. In some cases, slaves even earned their freedom, and for them, the emotional drive to succeed and gain independence was paramount. The fear of natural disasters, such as earthquakes, was another emotional burden that the people of Pompeii faced. In 62 AD, the city had been struck by a powerful earthquake that caused extensive damage. Many families were still in the process of rebuilding their homes when the eruption occurred, a fact that likely added to their sense of unease. Earthquakes were common in the region, and people lived with the constant threat of another disaster. They did not know that the true catastrophe was still to come, one that would change the course of their lives forever. The panic and chaos of the eruption when the eruption began on the fateful day of August 24th, 79 AD. The people of Pompeii were not prepared for the sheer scale of the disaster. Pliny the Younger's account, written many years later, described how the sky darkened and the earth shook violently. As the ash cloud grew larger, many people still believed they had time to wait it out, having no idea that the eruption would become exponentially more violent and catastrophic as the hours passed. As the initial eruption sent rocks, ash, and pumice into the air, the residents of Pompeii likely felt a mixture of fear, confusion, and disbelief. Their city, once full of life and activity, was rapidly changing into a dangerous and inhospitable landscape. The dense ash and the heat from the pyroclastic surges filled the air, making escape nearly impossible. It's likely that many people felt an intense surge of panic, realizing too late the full extent of the disaster. Emotional responses would have ranged from overwhelming fear to a desperate attempt to save loved ones and protect belongings. The fact that so many victims were found clutching their possessions, such as ironhouse keys, speaks to the urgency with which they tried to secure their homes before fleeing. Some may have even made the heartbreaking decision to stay behind, fearing the eruption outside while trying to protect their families from the chaos within. The final moments, preserving Pompeii's last breath. Final moments of Pompeii's citizens were filled with emotion, fear, loss, confusion, and love. Many of the victims, trapped by the sudden eruption, died not from lava, but from the heat and suffocation caused by pyroclastic flows. The bodies of these individuals were preserved in the ash, frozen in positions that reflect the emotional and physical turmoil of their last moments. Some were found in the streets, attempting to flee, while others were found inside their homes, clutching their families or their most treasured possessions. In some cases, the bodies were found in positions that suggest they were still trying to protect their loved ones or seeking safety in their homes. The plaster casts created by archaeologists offer a haunting glimpse into the final emotions of the Pompeii victims' moments of fear, desperation, and sorrow. Conclusion: the emotional legacy of Pompeii is not just a city frozen in time. It is a powerful reminder of the human experience. The emotions, struggles, and lives of its inhabitants are still alive in the city's ruins, captured in the plaster casts and artifacts that remain. The people of Pompeii were much like us, living their lives, forming emotional connections, and facing daily struggles. Their story is one of both tragedy and resilience, offering a unique insight into the lives of ordinary people during one of the most devastating natural disasters in history. The emotional legacy of Pompeii endures through the plaster casts, the ruins, and the stories of its people. It serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the strength of human connections in the face of catastrophe. Today, Pompeii continues to inspire awe and reflection, reminding us not only of the power of nature, but also of the deep emotional bonds that connect us across time.